Welcome to the Slow Money Club podcast, the show giving you realistic ways of attaining financial freedom. We share get rich slow strategies to help you go from employee to entrepreneur and turn your dreams into income streams. Now here's your host, Kwesi.
Hello, and thank you again for joining me on the Slow Money podcast. Now today, I am delighted to be joined by the wonderful Susannah Cole. So for those of you who don't know Susannah, she's a very prominent person in the property network. She's done lots of deals, so to speak. I think that's an understatement, but she's done lots of deals and she's very familiar with developing properties, finding them, sourcing them, getting funding for them across the board in the life cycle of a property investment. But Susannah didn't always do property, and that's what we're going to start with. I think I'll throw in a curveball there as well and tell you that Susannah is actually a weightlifter.
Make me laugh.
Yeah, but we won't talk about that. I'll just let that hang. Think about that as we start. So hello, Susannah. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. And really nice to be here. And really nice to have a good chat with you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. I always like talking to people like you. I mean, I think one of the things I like about Susannah is that she embodies what slow money is all about, really. You know, that patience, that persistence, approach and taking action. And that's what she's done from the beginning. You know, she's taken control of her financial future. And I'll let Susannah tell the story, but why don't we start from the beginning? So, Susannah, where did it all start?
Oh, well, I guess it's two ways. Well, three ways, isn't it? Stuff you love, stuff you like doing, and then complete no other alternative. So I've always really loved business and just find entrepreneurship really interesting. When I was young, I was 22 and I had my first little responsibility, as I would call her, who's now 24, so you can work out my age. And I started a fair trade business when I was young. And part of that was because I had a young child and there was no way I would be able to go to a normal day job and still spend time with her. So being an entrepreneur meant that I could both earn an income for my family, but also spend time with my children. And that was really important to me. So I started, I suppose, as an entrepreneur, age 22, and I had a little tiny pasting table, you know, the wallpaper table. And I went to fairs and festivals and sold fair trade items. And this is when fair trade was still quite new, you know, so fair trade chocolate, fair trade worry dolls, things from India, Guatemala, South Africa. And I really, really believe in fair trade. I think people have to be decent to each other, but also it taught me to be an entrepreneur. And I grew it from a little pasting table to 7 shops up in Scotland. I was working crazy hours, so there was kind of double-edged sword. On the one hand, as an entrepreneur, you've got the flexibility. On the other hand, if your average purchase price is $4.95, you need to do an awful lot of work to make an income that can be useful to your family.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The entrepreneurism started early, really.
Just one point to make. You said, so you were 21 when you had your daughter and so that makes you about 23 now, right?
Yeah. Sadly, I was 22. Or I don't mean sadly, but yeah, I'm still under 30.
Yeah. You're probably still under 25.
She is older than, she's now 24.
I'm pretty good at maths, okay? So I calculate you're probably still under 25. So that's the first point.
Yes, thank you. I'll take that.
And fair trade. So that's really interesting because I didn't know that. And what attracted you to the fair trade aspect of it?
I genuinely think it's a reasonable thing to do to, on the one hand, I think commerce needs to be about people looking, commerce and entrepreneurialism. You need to be very clear about your profit margin, your gross profit, your net profit, your return on sales, your cost base, your overhead, and the service you provide, which gives a markup and a positive income. So on the other hand, I think there's got to be human fairness. And I think there's a huge difference between being fair to people and taking advantage of people. And being a youngster at the time, that kind of feeling that the third world maybe didn't have an equal playing field in which to do commerce, in which to have peaceful, profitable commerce and therefore grow. And I felt really strongly about it. So I wanted to do something about it. Although I'm not sure how selling thousands and thousands of Guatemalan worry dolls changed the world, but I felt like I was trying to do something anyway.
Well, that's the important thing, isn't it, though? You were actually taking action and trying to make a difference.
Yeah, or wanted to, yeah. And so I did that for 7 years, and it was really enjoyable. And I was advised by the Prince's Trust and they were a great organization. So I had some really high level people come in and give me advice, which I'm forever grateful for. So we had one chap who had 70 shops, and he came in almost as a non-exec director to give me some strong pieces of advice. And then I thought, hang on, I need to get a job. Well, I didn't think I need to get a job, because I don't think as an entrepreneur you ever think that way. But I definitely recognized, almost weirdly, by being advised by these high level people, that I definitely had some gaps. Because if you grow as an entrepreneur, you're very much bootstrapping, you're developing up yourself. And some of the stuff that you do learn in corporate world is actually really useful as an entrepreneur later on. So weirdly, I kind of realized that, you know what, there's quite a lot of stuff I don't know about, because I've tried to do everything myself. And if I had a greater breadth of knowledge, I'd probably be better at this. I mean, it was quite successful, but I'd probably do a lot better. So I decided to go and get a small number of jobs to really grow my knowledge, not necessarily to have a job, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then started my property business.
So one of the things I always say, and actually I do myself, is that I use my job and my career as a mentor, almost as an opportunity to learn about the different aspects of business, the different ways of doing business, systems, processes, managing people, etc. And that's, I think, what you're saying. You felt that you needed to go back into the working world in order to gain certain skills that you would gain quicker, and maybe even at a less of an expense in a job.
If you look at your day job, not as the enemy, even if, there are moments that anybody who's in a day job kind of, let's be fair, that there are moments where you can feel really constricted by the job. You've got to be in a certain place at a certain time, and you wouldn't necessarily have chosen for that to be the case. And, I don't know, even just, you're not necessarily always working with people you'd necessarily choose to work, even if there are some brilliant people there too. But if you can look at it more as an education than a kind of prison, then fabulous. And that's what I did. I went and did some more education, did an MBA, did a professional postgrad, and also just decided to consider my day job as education. And it was brilliant for that, because I kind of, like Donald Rumsfeld, I didn't know what I didn't know, but I knew there was definitely some unknown unknowns.
Yeah. And
professional life can really deliver that for a while. But I also knew there was absolutely no way I wanted to be in a job until I was 65. It wouldn't have been useful to me. Should we just put it politely?
Yeah. I think a lot of people have realized that, especially in the millennial generation, with things like, the high prices of houses and other assets, etc. They realize that they're not going to be able to have the lifestyle that they want being in a job. And plus, pension funds are have massive deficits. So people realize that now, whereas you realized that quite a while ago.
Yeah. And actually, as a kind of secondary thing, it was looking at pensions and thinking, well, like, I'm from Scotland, and it's like, hey, this just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to hand over a massive amount of money to somebody else who's commission-based to manage. And if it goes wrong, I've got really very little I can do about it. Now, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And whereas property does make sense, and it always made sense. So part of it was choice, and part of it was choice into entrepreneurialism, choice into a job, and then definitely choice into property. Part of it's because I absolutely love property, always have done, and I can't see myself ever not just loving almost everything about property, with the usual frustrations that exist.
Yeah.
And then part of it was I had a family, and there was no alternative really. If I want to make sure my kids are safe, how do I do this? And property is just going to be the thing that's going to deliver on that.
And so just going back to your working part of your life, at which point did you think it was kind of the right time for you to make that transition, as opposed to some people either want to jump too soon, they want to kind of make a cliff edge jump and jump into property and buy a house and make full income from it tomorrow, versus other people who are constantly have analysis paralysis and are always thinking about it and looking at houses, but never actually executing on a deal. At which point do you realize, and what made you realize there was actually a good time to make that transition from employee to entrepreneur?
So I think the name of your podcast is actually really useful, Slow Money, because on the one hand, there's the urgency to provide a stable, long-term, secure base for your family. And for myself through pensions. That was ridiculously urgent. On the other hand, there's just the kind of knowledge that if I get this wrong, I could really mess up here. We're not talking about small amounts of money. We're talking about massive amounts of money. So, what if I get this wrong? This will be a problem. And so as a result, I decided to do a lot of learning first. So I spent an entire year reading books, looking online, writing the most ridiculously long business plans because I was terrified of getting it wrong, and really kind of mentally getting my ducks in a row. And I guess it's about appreciating your own learning style. So are you a person that can jump straight away, or are you a person who would quite like to learn quite a bit so you feel like, I wouldn't say you're in control because I don't think you are in control sometimes on property, but you at least have a strong understanding of the environment that you're in, the systems you might like to take up, the legal environment that you're in well in advance. And I'm that kind of person. So I spent a whole year reading, did nothing, and then went for it, and then absolutely went super fast. So it's that year of preparation. And I did 4 jobs on purpose. I always knew I would never have more than 4 jobs. And during the 4th job, in fact, during the 3rd job, I spent the year reading. And then during the 4th job, half of that was spent reading. And then the other part of that, I spent a year and a half, so 18 months, still in my full-time day job, buying the first bunch of properties. And I built a property portfolio of worth 1.8 million before I jumped out of my day job.
Wow.
And at that point, I jumped out.
And
And I raised 600 grand to do that while I was in the day job as well.
Did you have that as a specific figure in mind, or did you have any kind of benchmarks that you were looking at?
Oh, it's so cute. Because I don't know if anyone can relate to this. When you're looking at property and you've not yet done it, £1 million portfolio sounds huge. It did to me anyway. So to me, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to make that. And actually, my business plan was written that I wanted a £2 million portfolio. I wanted to buy 20 houses worth 100 grand each. And that seemed unbelievably inaccessible or unattainable. And actually, even before I jumped out my day job, I'd bought 1.8 million pounds worth of property. That was going quite slow. And after that, boom, we did 45 million quid's worth of property, purchase for 30 million, agreed purchase at 30 million quid over the next 5 years. And I was always the biggest buyer. So that was a sourcing business we ran. And I was the biggest buyer of those properties. So the plan was to buy a £2 million portfolio. And really, within 6 months of jumping out my day job, I'd gone way past that. And that was kind of 8 years ago. So my plan seemed unattainable. But once you practice, you got the skills, you got your cookie cutter, and you repeat again and again, you actually find it's really, I wouldn't say easy, but you find the momentum pushes you forward.
Yeah. And did you know that actually it was the right time to just make that step because you had exceeded your expectations on your business plan, or were you still hesitant, or were you still kind of reticent to do that?
You're definitely nervous. There's no doubt about that. With hindsight, it's like, yeah, it was all a big plan. No, it wasn't. It was terrifying. But what I did do was I went down from 5 days a week to 4 days a week with my boss. So for those 18 months, because time is the massive, massive, massive game changer. And then the second thing I did, which was quite useful, is I didn't take holidays like in the traditional way, if you see what I mean, in that final year. What I did do was every single holiday, more or less, that I took was a day a week. So I ended up, and obviously I talked it through with my boss and asked his permission first, because that would have really irritated him if I'd just gone ahead on it.
Yeah,
but what it meant was I was able to have like the weekend, and I worked Saturdays because my kids were old enough then that they were like, yeah, mum, whatever. We really don't think you're cool enough to hang out with on a Saturday. Oh, please. But Sundays, I was like, no, Sundays is definitely family day. So Sundays was roast dinner and, making sure homework's done and baths and school clothes and, all of that stuff. So it meant that I had one day off with the family, one day where really I was just mum the taxi and gave them supper at night time, and then 2 days in the week. So it was really about bringing time into my business, but in a graded way. And then the other bit I did, which, I mean, guys, it doesn't sound fun, and I'm sorry to be like super unsexy about this. What I did was I actually put 50% of my salary into a pension.
Wow.
And so basically I took the entrepreneurial pay cut for the end of the month, 18 months before I actually took the pay cuts, because I was running a startup business.
Yeah.
And that was really useful, because first it meant that I felt a bit more secure. I had more money in my pension. And second, it meant that I didn't get a massive shock on what it's like to live on, baked beans on toast while you're running a property portfolio in the early days. I'd had that shock 18 months earlier, and I'd lived in it for a while, and I'd already recalibrated our outgoings. And actually, we were just as happy. And plus, I was doing a full-time day job and 30 hours in property. So to be honest, I had no time to spend any money anyway.
Yeah.
But as a family, we were just as happy.
I mean, I think I'm not going to skip over that because that's a bit of a genius move that you mentioned there about putting half of your money into your pension fund in so many ways. I mean, for a start, as you mentioned, you took that pay cut in advance, but also it actually gave you a bit of security in the background.
Yeah.
And so even if everything went wrong, in the back end, you did have some security that you'd been saving up for. And actually something that people, I mean, pension funds are pension funds, but one thing that people underestimate is that when you're working and you pay into your pension, especially if your employee matches it, and you save things like national insurance in it, the compound effect of that can be quite big, even enough to kind of circumvent any cut in the actual inflation. Plus, actually, as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you know there are ways in which you can access your pension funds through businesses and through companies later on, depending on the size, etc.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a bit of a genius move that I don't think I've ever heard you mention, but that's a nugget.
I'd love to pretend I was a genius, but it was kind of incidental. It was done more through fear than through genius strategy, to be quite frank. And I think with hindsight, you look back and you go, oh, I'm pleased I made some moves. A lot of them were through moving away from pain rather than moving towards pleasure, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's perfectly how things tend to pan out, isn't it? In adversities, when sometimes you make some of the genius moves. So yeah. And I think the other point to mention is, you know, you went from 1.8 million to 45 million in a relatively short space of time. And that would be quite daunting to a lot of people who may be even on the other side of that 1.8 figure. And so how did that whole process happen? Did it happen overnight? Did you just wake up one day and all of a sudden money was falling on your lap?
Well, I didn't buy every single one of those properties. I bought a very large proportion of them. But so it kind of happened by design, to be fair, but I had no idea what the end figure would be. So I knew what the journey would be. I knew that we were going to run a sourcing business because I felt that property is such a big cash suck in the middle of buying property, renovating it before you get it rented out and refinance. So I knew that property was this big cash suck in the middle, and I knew that we needed some kind of business to bring cash in the meantime to buy more properties with. So basically we got good at two skills. We got good at sourcing deals below market value, and then we got good at working with investors. And once you can do something, you do it again and again and again. And suddenly you think, oh my Lord, we're at 100 deals, and then you're at 150, then you're at 200, because you're doing the same cookie cutter with a bit of improvement. But basically you're sourcing deals and you're working with investors. And there's a number of different ways you can do. You can sell the deal onto the investor and earn a commission, and we did quite a lot of that. And all that money went straight back into the properties. You can source a deal and decide, as long as you're 13.3 compliant, to work with the investor to do buy to sell, a joint venture together. And we did an awful lot of those. Or you can source a deal and work with the investor, and they can lend you the money to buy the property. You refinance it, pay them back out with interest. You own the asset and they've earned good interest. But basically it's the same premise. Get good at sourcing deals, get good at raising money.
Yeah, I like that. And as you described there are various ways that you can actually just take that forward. The first bit obviously is sourcing the deals, but in terms of executing and getting to that end position, you don't necessarily have to follow one approach or one strategy. No.
But the core competency is the same. Can you find a deal that's got a good amount of profit in it? Yes. Can you find some people who would like to invest in one way or another? Yes. Great. Put them together.
Okay.
Make sure you're compliant and navigate the risks, and make them understand that at times there are risks involved, and build a great team, and off you go. So it's really repetition of the same thing. And I kind of just saw no reason to stop, really. So I didn't plan, we're going to do 45 million quid of property. I mean, the other day I sat down with a friend of mine who's like, Suze, I've been in property since 1990 and I've done 48 million GDV. And I was like, super impressed. We're having a good, honestly, I was like, wow, that's amazing. We had a right good chat about what he was doing in property. And then I came away and I was like, oh, girl, you did 45 million quid worth of property in 5 years. That's not bad either. And so you don't really, I never aimed the numbers. The team and I got good at the stuff and kept doing it.
Yeah, that's it. As you said before, repetition. And why stop a good thing if it's working? And I'm sure along the
Yeah.
way you were learning and you were evolving the process.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
coming back to the first step in that process of sourcing property, I guess, what would you say is the single biggest learning point that you discovered?
It's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. So people come up and say, "Oh, I couldn't find a property." And the first question I'll ask is, "How many phone calls have you made?" And if they've made 10, the likelihood is they're not going to source the property. We would do between 100 and 135 phone calls a week. We would do between 25 and 35 viewings a week. And we would offer on 85% of properties we viewed. Those were our rules.
Yeah.
And we found, on average, I mean, they're like buses. So, 2 weeks you get nothing, and then 1 week you get 3 deals. But on average, we would do 50 deals a year. So roughly, we're doing a deal a week. So 100% is a numbers game. If you think about it, discounted properties, so properties that are being sold wholesale, if you want to frame it that way, I personally think there are only between 1% and 2% of properties on the market. So if you only do 10 phone calls a week, you are going to take 10 weeks before you discover a discounted property. Whereas if you do 100 to 130 phone calls a week, you're going to find a discounted property kind of roughly once a week. Because you're only looking for 1% to 2% of all the houses that are being sold on the market.
Yeah.
So yeah, numbers game.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really good. And then, so then in terms of the next step, finding people to match to those deals, what's the
Yes.
biggest thing you've learned in that sector?
Take it slow. I'm not trying to be like super schmoozy to your podcast, but take it slow. Honestly, like just think about it this way. Well, I just always think about Beyonce. If you liked it, you should put a ring on it.
Yeah.
And if you meet somebody on a date, you are not going to get married to them the next date, are you? You're going to take it slow. You're going to get to know them. You're going to see how they behave with other people. You're just going to figure them out. So again, if we go to numbers, I would suggest that it's sensible to think about raising money or working with investors. I would suggest you want to be thinking, on average, from the time I meet somebody to the time I'm going to work with them, it'll take me 6 months. And you're like, "Oh no, Suze, I won it yesterday." Okay, we'll start 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And then you're going to probably need to talk and meet with them between 5 and 9 times to build trust, for you to trust them, for them to trust you. I really hated the concept when I first started, but you need a veto list, which sounds awful. And I really didn't like that idea.
What's a veto list?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it felt really dehumanizing, but actually it's just really practical. If you meet somebody who's dead keen to work with you and has money and fits all the technical criteria, but somehow either often their behavior in a group, everybody's nice to meet one-on-one because, with the gorgeous will in the world, I had a lot to provide for them. But can they be nice to other people in the group? And so once you've seen what they're like in a group behavior, if they're a bit kind of me, rather than let me be considerate of the others in the group, you're kind of seeing how they're going to behave when things go tough sometimes. So then there will be a few people that you decide, I am going to make the choice not to work with you. Put them on the veto list or whatever you want to call the list. And what it means is it clears your mind of not worrying about what you do with those people. They're no longer in your brain hanging around, but you've just placed them on the this isn't going to proceed for me list. And that's actually weirdly quite important. But psychologically speaking, as I found later on, it's quite empowering because it almost helps you remind yourself that you're in charge of who you decide to work with. They're in charge of choosing whether they work with you, and you're in charge of choosing if you work with them. So it ends up being a better fit, doesn't it, for both parties?
That's an interesting point because often people, when they're looking for money, are just focused on the money and not necessarily thinking about the person or the interaction with that person.
Yes.
Whereas you're saying actually start there and come up with a list, maybe even a criteria of people of certain things you don't want from a person. And then, if you meet people like that, just cross them off the list and move on to the next one.
Totally. So in the end, like after quite a few years experience, we came up with a set of criteria. And we literally had a kind of scoring criteria of the investors we wanted to work with. Now, you've got to presume they have money. That obviously, I suppose, has to be one of the criteria. But every other piece of criteria was all about the personality and their ability to deliver fast. Do paperwork? Can they do paperwork fast? Do they understand the property process? Are they a nice person? Was genuinely one of our pieces of criteria. Do they bring value to us? And we didn't mean cash. We meant just, are they a radiator? Are they great to work with? Do they bring interesting stuff? So you really realize quite quickly, although the whole thing theoretically is all about money and looking for money, The reality is it's all about human relationships. And you probably hear other people say this and you're like, no, I just need the money. No, it's all about the relationship.
Okay.
And then it becomes fun to work with people. But it's also mathematical. It's also 5 to 9 touch points, because as human beings, and I was really interested, as our profile got a wee bit bigger, I thought, well, this will be useful because it will reduce down the amount of times I need to speak to somebody if I'm raising money. Nope, didn't at all. So it was nothing about the fact that we were quite well known and therefore quite viewed as, reasonably successful. Therefore, the person would be more comfortable because they think, well, there's a greater level of success here. It's obvious. No, they still had to build that emotional trust with me, the human being. So it still took exactly the same amount of time. I just found that fascinating.
Yeah, that
really
is interesting. And they always say people by people.
Yeah.
You mentioned as your profile got bigger, there's always this debate. Some people I know say, they do things quietly and they do things on the side and they try to work on the side. Whereas other people talk about branding, public profile, persona, etc. So what are your thoughts on that?
It depends what you want to achieve, and it depends what your drivers are, really. If you're going to go pure property, then I think you can do a very clean delivery, which is all about brand, all about quiet profile. And by that, I mean, as a reputation. So I get asked a lot, what do you think about so-and-so? Now, I would never publicly say anything negative. It's just not my personality or style. But quietly, I might be like, you might want to check out this because, things haven't gone so well there. Or I've heard fantastic things about this person from 4 other people. There's kind of a quiet reputation check that definitely your investors will do. And if you purely want to do property, then that's all you need to do. You need to deliver, be upstanding, and when things go wrong, still stand to your ground. You are not a shop promising a beautifully packaged up piece of, you're doing entrepreneurial work, and there are definitely going to be times when things go wrong, but just be above board and stick to all the agreements that you've got at the point at which something does go wrong. But because we got asked really early on to do mentoring, and I was a bit like, who, me? What? And then I discovered I just adore it. I absolutely adore. Like, we have 2 really fantastic mentor groups, an online and a face-to-face. And you get to know people really well, and you get to know about their lives, and you kind of get, involved in their well-being and them doing well. And so for the mentoring and the education side, which I adore doing as well, you really do need a public profile. So because you need to be sort of seen and on people's horizon for a while before they decide to work with you. But I think if you were going in purely as a property developer, you could comfortably be well-known privately and highly thought of privately, so that some of the key influencers in the industry would talk well of you, because, you could potentially manage your personal brand, if you want to call it that way, by inviting people like you, people that run magazines, to come and see projects that you've done, people like John Corey, who I think the world of, to almost allow them to verify you as solid without having a huge social media presence.
Yeah, that's interesting. So on the mentoring point, and I think I agree with you totally on what you're saying. Another question that I often get asked is around the mentoring point. And how do you find a good mentor? How do you find the right person? Because especially in property, I mean, in other sectors that I operate in, it's less of an issue. I mean, for example, I've done lots of mentoring outside of property, and I've mentored and I've been a mentee, and I've never had to pay for that privilege. Whereas when I came into property, it's a totally different scenario. And so one of the questions I often get asked is, how do you actually find someone that's a good mentor? Some mentors don't do property at all. They just talk about it. Other people, charge a lot of money for their mentorship programs, etc. So how do you navigate that whole sphere?
I think because, of course, a mentor is going to help you develop up your strategy as well. But I think you're going to have some kind of gut feel where you want to end up. So, do you want to be a developer and do a load of buy to sell and do a load of build? Or do you want to end up with a large scale portfolio? Has that person got the kind of experience that you would need to learn from to be successful at what you broadly want to do? And they need to have a lot of experience, because they need to have, frankly, a mentor needs to have made all the mistakes they're then going to prevent you from making. So on the plus side, a mentor is there to guide you positively and really support your positive growth. But a mentor is there to quietly prevent mistakes that will be costly because the mentor's already paid for them. And so half the time, I think a good mentor should be somebody that you come at the end of the year and think, thanks, that was brilliant. But you don't have an understanding of half the stuff the person has prevented you from screwing up on.
Yeah.
And that is a numbers game. We've had legal processes with a very small number of builders. One, we've had mediation with builder. We've had a builder jump in and steal a kitchen. We've had a builder get
Wow.
busting us. Oh, like, I'm not laughing, but this stuff happens. We've had tenants run off and you take them to court. You've had to do evictions. And the mentor needs to have been down and dirty with the tough stuff so that then they understand how to spot the signs and how to behave if that ever happens to you. You don't want to suddenly realize you've reached the end of your mentor's experience and you've gone a wee bit further, because that's not going to help you. So I think the first one is experience. And then I think the second one is almost the mentor's ability to kind of mentally allow structure and place and give cues that allows you to understand what's happening and understand you enough to give you the right cues. Almost like sports coaching. Some verbal cues will work for one person, like you said, I do weightlifting, and some verbal cues will work for another person. And the mentor has to have the flexibility to understand which cue is going to work for you. So in my group, I got a couple of fantastic people for whom life is the whole reason why. They do not want to run a million miles an hour, and they do not want to build a massive portfolio. They want to buy like 4 houses a year. Brilliant. So we know that the cue of time with family, time with loved ones, and high efficiency is really important to them. And then I've got guys that want to do 3, 4, 5 million GDV, and the cue for them is scale, but not making mistakes. So very different cues, and understanding why the person wants to do the thing in the first place. So, and then the final thing, I know I'm going on here, but is values. Like, I have a personalized number plate, and it makes me laugh every time I buy parking because it's Susie C, and I'm like, but I have a Mini Cooper, and I'm not particularly a petrol head, but I'm not particularly flash with cash, and some people are, and I think it's just which set of values is right for you. For me, I'm about building assets rather than flashing the cash round, and if that value attracts a person, then that's great because you're in the same mindset. But if you want to be a massive petrol head, and fair play to you if you do and have the latest Lamborghini, and again, fair play to you if you do, that kind of more measured approach to property is probably not going to work for you, because I'll be like going, hang on, let's reinvest. And you're like, no, I want to buy an orange Lamborghini. And I'm like, well, okay, but that's a couple of houses, so values I think are really important. So yeah, experience, ability to cue somebody correctly and understand what drives them, and then shared values, I think works.
That makes a lot of sense, and I like those. And so on that similar topic, looking separately at when you are looking at deals as an investor, what sort of things should you be looking for? So, I know that you haven't necessarily invested in other people's deals, but if you were to, what sort of things would you look for, and what should people look for when they're investing in your own deals?
Sure. First off, the figures, check them. So when we were releasing deals, which we no longer do, we only buy the deals ourselves now, we would do about 45 pieces of research and be very open about our research. So we'd look at 20 solds within the last 6 months, 20 on the market or sold subject to contract, and then we take 5 estate agent desktop opinions. So when you're doing a piece of research to try and figure out the value of a deal, and you're looking at 45 pieces of research, the likelihood of either you or the person bringing the deal to you getting it wrong is significantly reduced. And that's really important. So research rather than 2 or 3 comparables, 45 pieces of research comparables makes sense to me. Second one is margin or markup or yield. For a buy to sell, the minimum you want to be looking at is a 20% markup after all cost. And for a buy to keep, the minimum I want you to be looking at is a 10% yield. And for anybody that's new to property, I didn't know what yield was when I started. Gross yield is annual rent divided by purchase price. So 2 key rules: 20% markup minimum, 10% yield if it's a buy to let.
And to markup, you thankfully defined yield for us, but what about markup?
Markup on what, the buy to sell or the buy to keep?
What is markup?
Oh, sorry. Okay, can we just take it super easy? Not many houses are bought at this price anymore, but let's say the house is 80 grand, the renovation cost is 14 grand, and the fees in and out are 6 grand, just to keep life easy. So it's a 100 grand house. That's what it costs you to buy and sell it. If you can't sell it for 20% more than the total cost of the house, i.e. 120, don't bother.
Okay. But I guess if you were doing things like work to that house, and then there are things like stamp duty and other costs, you probably need
Yes.
to bear that in mind on that figure. So you probably want a lot more than 120 grand
Oh,
if you were
well,
to
I
do.
want, yeah, I want you to include the stamp duty and all the fees as well.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the gross
Yes.
price. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So it's not just the price of buying the property, it's the price of everything you do to the property and everything you're charged to buy the property and sell the property again.
Yeah, and you want 20% on that. Yeah, I understand.
Yes, I do. Yes. And then the other bit that I would look at if I was investing elsewhere, what's plan B? Because I just know things go wrong in property. So, yeah, we're committed to buying and selling this property, but what if it goes wrong? What if there simply isn't a buyer at that time? How can you rent it out? Who would be the rental people? Who would manage it? What would be the rental income? And what would be the next step? Would it be rented for 6 months and then put it back on the market again? So I'd want to know fast, if plan A didn't work, what is plan B? Because you can't be stuck with just plan A. Property is such an illiquid asset. You've got to have the fluidity. And then finally, I'd look at the person. And then I would be on the other side of it. I'd be 5 to 9 touch points, on average 6 months, figuring out if I wanted to work with that person. And I'd like to go and see other projects they've done. I'd like to meet other investors they work with. I'd like to hear how they dealt with stuff when it went wrong, particularly.
Yeah, that makes sense too. So on that note, actually, can you tell me about how you've dealt with something that's gone wrong? What's the worst thing that's happened on one of your projects and how did you deal with it?
Oh, can you tell? Quite a few things. I mean, stuff does go. So the typical things that go wrong, there'll be roof problems, damp problems, or cost overrun problems. That's typical. I mean, when you buy a property, you can't go into the roof as much as you'd like. I mean, you can go in a bit, but you can't really jabber around there. And you can't necessarily lift up carpets. So you are at risk of roof problems and you are at risk of damp. And then you are at risk of third party. You know, we have had a builder go insolvent once. And as I said, we had somebody, I mean, now I'm laughing, but it wasn't very much fun at the time. 7.5 grand kitchen, somebody break in and steal a kitchen back.
Wow.
So a classic, it was irritating, I tell you, but there you are. I mean, it's, you know, you've got to keep a sense of humor in property. But a classic problem I had, which is kind of inverted commas, darn it problem. I bought a fantastic house, which was 4 bedrooms, 2 reception rooms, and I turned it into a 5-bed HMO, all en suite. Really lovely, big, roomy southern belle of a house, just lovely. And we discovered that it had dry rot all the way up the front.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, yeah, I know. Now, typically it cost me 45 grand to renovate a house into a 5-bed HMO with all en suites. And here, this one ended up costing me 60 grand. So I had a 15 grand overspend. And the reason for the dry rot, it'd been in the same family for 30 years. A neighbour's pipe had been dripping on the facade of the property for like 30 years. Just like a tiny drip, you know, like one drip every 3 or 4 minutes for 30 years. So the builders went in and they're like, Suze, we've got dry rot. And I was like, okay, dry rot, we can handle. And they're like, no, we've got it all the way up the building. So they just had to excavate right back, hack everything back, get rid of everything, almost like a doctor, and then rebuild joists and all the front. And you just have to roll with it. Of course, when it's happening, it's not like you've sat there and put 15 grand spare aside because you're using every penny. So, you know, we lived on beans on toast for a little bit. But now that property makes like well over £1,000 a month, and it's grown by about 120, 140 grand value in a couple of years. So I'm not unhappy with it.
But I think there's an interesting point here I want to point out. So earlier we talked and you said the gross price on a buy to sell or the yield on a buy to hold. And so this project was a buy to hold. And on this project, you were looking for a 10% plus yield. And so because it wasn't a buy to sell, you didn't need to sell it, because otherwise I'm guessing you wouldn't have made that 20% on the margin that we spoke about.
And that is another reason. So let's presume this was a buy to sell. As it is, I've still got it. It's literally around the corner and it's a brilliant house. But, you know, I had a heart-stopping moment with it. So that's another reason why you want a 20% margin, because when you've got 15 grand extra costs, so you've got my renovation costs on this one should have been about 45. They ended up being 60. Your margin can by and large absorb that. So you might come out the end going, darn it, I learned a lot, but made 5 grand instead of 20 or whatever. But because you've got a reasonable cushion and you've been very strict with yourself at making sure you've got 20% markup, at least you're not coming out the other end with a loss. You're like, okay, well, that was more a learn than a profit-making job. But there we go. What did we learn? What could we do better next time?
And that's also why you need a plan B. I mean, I think one of the things I try and do when I look at property deals is have a margin that I can sell it for. But plan A is to be able to buy and hold. So
Yes, definitely.
really
Yes.
being able to do both is kind of the best hedge you can have.
Yes, definitely. And what I did quite often was plan to actually sell the property and then just be like, oh no, I love it. And because I'd done a plan A and plan B, plan A being I'm going to sell it. And then once I got it renovated, I was like, oh man, I went through all this, not pain, but all this pain and graft to buy it, to fund it, because I don't think I've ever bought a property where I knew exactly how I was going to be able to pay for it. I have never, and that's true, I have never, ever had the full amount of money at point of agreeing the purchase. I've always had to hustle quite a bit because, of course, I'm, like Poe's running. I'm always running forward. So you think, oh, I went through all that pain and all that stress to buy it. Let's just keep it. And then, of course, the beauty is because you've got a high yield, you just refinance it, pay it back out, whether it was an investor or a bridge or, however you bought it, and then you rent it straight away. And I've done that repeatedly. So really, I should have had more cash in the early days, but I kept keeping properties that I was supposed to sell, which is probably not great discipline, but I'm very grateful for now because of capital growth.
Yeah, capital growth, and I'm sure as well because of the yield you've got in the interim.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think, again, another important point that you made there is that you bought this property and you had to overspend by 15K, which is a lot for most people on that type of deal that would break them. But, you still have the property now and you still keep it now. So what's your long-term plan? Are you planning on just keeping it forever, or are you going to sell it now that you've got some capital growth in it?
Oh no, I'm a keeper, really. I mean, I love the buy to sell strategy, and I think it's a really sensible strategy to do. Buy 5, keep 3, sell 2 is a very sensible strategy. But I'm a total keeper. So I respond well to challenges. I'm very frustrated at the new taxation. A great majority of properties in my personal name. I have a major portfolio. And I'm now facing a major additional tax bill because in the future we won't be able to use our mortgage interest as a cost, and obviously it is a cost. However, part of me, so I think you rot bag, Chancellor, you complete rotter. But part of me says, all right then, kind of see ya, raise ya. If you're going to make that happen to me, I'm going to take action as an entrepreneur. And so I'm having fun. I've just paid down the first of my properties because I was on a 10-year growth strategy. So it was so much fun. I went into the bank just before Christmas there. I went in, I was all very relaxed. Yeah, paid the property off and then walked out the bank. And then it was like, oh my God, I'm all giddy now. I don't know what to do with myself. So I'm now in this really exciting moment of dominoes going, right, one down, what's next? You know the game where you line all the dominoes up in this great big long route and then I'm on that and it's fun. So I wouldn't be on that if the new taxation rules had come in. So in a weird way, I wouldn't say I'm grateful for them because I think they're rude and unfair, but they're forcing a different piece of behavior from me.
Yeah, what I like about that is as an entrepreneur, you have to be reactive. You can be as strategic as you want and think as far ahead as you want, but you don't control things like politicians or economic conditions.
No, you don't.
So you have to be able to be reactive. And to this, you mentioned the change, the taxation, and how it's going to adversely affect landlords who have interest they need to pay. I think many people are reacting in different ways, and some people are looking to transfer or sell their properties to their own companies. What you're describing actually is a very novel approach, which I don't think many people are talking about, which is actually you could pay down your debt so the interest is no longer an expense. And I think that's a good approach. I mean, not many people are talking about it. So what made you choose that approach as opposed to trying to still be able to leverage and mortgage these properties in the future?
I think part of it is because I had built up quite a substantial portfolio and a bit like if I was to buy another pair of shoes, because I may have quite a lot of shoes, as much as I'd be like all aflutter with the glitz and the glam of them, it wouldn't make a massive difference to my life. And now I love property and I'm absolutely going to go on the next buying spree. There's no doubt about it. But it won't make a massive difference to my life if I own another house, whereas in the early days it would. So I'm fortunate that I've got the first sort of growth spurt done with, and I've got a really substantial portfolio. So I don't have that hunger to buy the next one immediately. I always had properties circling, landing, taking off, being renovated at the time. And I'm a bit stubborn and Scottish. It's like, well, I don't want anybody telling me what to do. And as long as I owe debt, somebody tells me what to do, like the Chancellor when he makes a new change in tax rules. No way, Buster. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. So if I pay it off and then look at some kind of wrapper like a trust to obviously reduce down taxation in the future, then I'm in charge of my destiny. And that's really what property gives you, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then I've got this fantastic, like I can feel it as much as it's as tangible as a wall. The next stage of growth for me will be buying for cash at auction. And it will just be a laugh, because we've done so many deals in the past and so many buy to sells, particularly buy to sells when you do rebridging. Now, buy to sell rebridging is a fantastic instrument. But at the end of it, when you've done lots and lots and lots of them, you turn around and go, wow, look at the hundreds of thousands of pounds that the bank took. Now, fair play to them. They facilitated the work. They gave the capital. They took a risk. They had security. But won't it be fun to be buying with your own bank money?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of really enthused about that as the next step. And bear in mind, anybody listening, I was a single parent with very, very little 10 years ago. So if I can do it, anybody can do it.
And I think that's a segue on. But to your point, one concept that I'm very keen on is something called Be Your Own Bank, BYOB.
Yes.
And that's effectively what you're describing, creating your own bank with your own cash flow. And that's one of the reasons I got into property, because it's an asset that allows you to do that, to create a cash flow generating asset, which you can then use that cash flow to finance other things, like other properties, as you're describing, or even other businesses or anything, a lifestyle, whatever you want. But that concept of being your own bank and having your own access to your own funding is a great one.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned the cost of funding.
Yeah, it's free. It's freedom, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, I don't think we were put in this earth to go into a little cubicle to work for somebody else our entire lives, necessarily. But I love working in a team.
Yeah. And we can form our own teams outside of a cubicle.
Yes, which is delish.
Okay, so I'm going to wind down, and I just want to ask you a quick series of quick-fire questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The first question I want to ask you actually is, what does financial freedom mean to you?
Choice. I mean, you mentioned I'm a weightlifter. I love Olympic weightlifting. I went to Rio and my coach competed at the Olympics. I do CrossFit. It means I can choose when I train, like today, I know I'm being a girl, but I'm going to get my hair done later on because we've got a workshop tomorrow. I don't feel guilty. Choice. Yeah. I choose when I train, when I go get my hair done, and when I work. Love it. My
second question actually is, tell me about Olympic weightlifting.
Oh, okay. When you're running I'm going to use the word mental. I don't mean that. I mean it in a kind of Scottish way. When you're running a very, very, very full-on high-growth property business, property acquisition, millions of pounds of private borrowing, and you're keeping it all together, but it can be slightly stressful. When you go train with somebody who tells you what to do and is at the Olympic Games level, so their competency is enormous, and you're putting heavy weights above your head, you can't think about anything else but making sure that weight doesn't crash down on you. So it's a fantastic zone out. So A, it was amazing I just switched my brain off for a bit. And B, what I love is seeing people who are amazingly good at what they do and then being coached by somebody. So my coach is Sonny Webster, who's a really good friend of mine, a brilliant guy. And he's coached me for 5 years now. So being coached by somebody who's at the top of their international game is just fantastic to be able to take some of those skills and try and put it into your own. And then the last thing is, darn it, nobody can naturally get really good at it. It's such a technically difficult sport. It's like love, love, hate, love, love, hate. And I find that really fun in a kind of way.
Interesting. And we'll link to your Facebook profile where people can see videos of you weightlifting.
I did put one up the other day just for a laugh. Yeah,
it was good. I found it motivating, to be honest with you. So I've met you. You're about half my height and you were lifting weights that I couldn't even dream of lifting. So anyway, the next question I have for you actually is, what's the biggest barrier you think investors face to getting into property?
Their own personal fear. And you need to realize it can be done. If I can do it, you guys can do it. If you can do it, they can do it. So it's a completely manageable, almost normal thing to do once you start doing it. So enter into the arena and take your first steps.
That's a great thing to finish on, I think. So Susannah, this has been my pleasure. And, I've learned so much speaking with you, and I'm sure my listeners have too. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. I've had a blast. We should definitely get together for a lifting session and go hang out and do more property, shouldn't we?
As long as we don't put it on Facebook, because I don't want to be embarrassed. But yeah, we will. And I look forward to actually, I'm sure I'll have you again at some point in the future. So
That would
thank
be
you.
lovely.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you very much. And good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like more information on what you just heard, go to slowmoneyclub.com and join the club. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever app you use. And please also give us a 5-star review. That way, you get the latest episode on your phone as soon as it's released. You also help other people discover this podcast too. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on the Slow Money Club.